Dawson City, Yukon Territory, September 1898. While experienced miners and trappers hastily assembled conventional cabins before winter's fury descended upon the Klondike, Jebediah Thornton was meticulously selecting stones from the Yukon riverbed, carrying each one up the steep embankment to his partially constructed cabin. His neighbors called it madness. They called him deluded. He was constructing a chimney that measured 5 feet wide and 8 feet tall, occupying nearly 30% of his modest 14-16 FT cabin's interior space. The massive stone structure required over 2,200 pounds of carefully selected soapstone, each piece evaluated for its thermal properties and structural integrity. Magnus Olsson, who'd survived 3 Yukon winters, shook his head in disbelief. "That chimney's taking up more space than my sleeping quarters and food storage combined," he remarked to anyone willing to listen. The settlement's resident construction expert, Lars Eriksson, a Swedish-born trapper who had built no fewer than 25 cabins across the Northern Territories, declared with professional certainty that Thornton's approach defied all practical frontier wisdom. A simple iron stove with proper stovepipe requires just 9 square feet of floor space and burns efficiently enough for any man, Erickson proclaimed during the community's evening gatherings. This New Englander is building himself a stone monument that will freeze him out of his own dwelling by December. The mathematical implications of Thornton's design troubled even experienced frontiersmen. Standard cabins dedicated approximately 5% of interior space to heating apparatus, preserving precious room for sleeping, cooking, and storage. Thornton's massive chimney consumed 42 square feet of his 224 square foot interior, leaving significantly reduced living space in a region where indoor confinement during winter months could stretch to 18 hours daily. Settlement leader James McPherson, whose military experience during the Canadian border conflicts had taught him the essentials of northern survival, watched Thornton's methodical work with growing concern. Where other newcomers followed established patterns of construction that prioritized speed and spatial efficiency, Thornton worked with unhurried precision, spending 3 weeks on stonework that most men would consider a 3-day task. Come January, McPherson predicted, while overseeing the community's winter preparations, when the mercury drops below 40 below, that man will be cursing every cubic foot of living space he sacrificed to that stone monstrosity. Yet, Thornton continued his methodical construction, carefully positioning each stone according to a complex internal design, featuring a labyrinth of baffling channels, invisible from the exterior. When questioned about his unconventional approach, Thornton offered only brief explanations that referenced knowledge unfamiliar to most Klondike inhabitants. "Heat rises, but it can be captured," he explained, while measuring the precise angle of an interior baffle. "The Finns and Russians understood this centuries ago. Stone doesn't just contain fire, it stores heat." The puzzling references to European heating traditions earned Thornton skeptical glances from men whose survival depended on proven methods. His background gradually emerged through conversations around community fires. Thornton had apprenticed with a Finnish stonemason in Massachusetts, where he had learned principles of masonry heating that had evolved through centuries of Northern European winter survival. These techniques, refined in climates with similar temperature extremes to the Yukon, represented a traditional knowledge system that industrial iron stoves had largely displaced in North America. As October's first snow dusted Dawson City, the contrast between approaches was stark. Magnus Olsson's cabin featured a standard iron stove occupying 9 square feet, providing immediate radiant heat, but requiring constant attention. Lars Eriksson's dwelling showcased frontier efficiency with a centrally positioned heating apparatus that had served similar cabins adequately for decades. McPherson's own shelter demonstrated military practicality, with dual heating sources positioned for maximum coverage of interior space. Meanwhile, Thornton's nearly completed chimney stood as a stone testament to either remarkable foresight or tragic miscalculation. Only the approaching Yukon winter would reveal which. By late September, Thornton had completed the masonry heater's core structure, revealing technical specifications that defied frontier construction norms. Unlike conventional chimneys, designed primarily to exhaust smoke, his creation featured a complex internal baffling system that forced hot gases through a labyrinth of stone channels before reaching the chimney exit. This serpentine path maximized heat transfer to the soapstone mass, creating a thermal battery capable of storing and gradually releasing energy long after flames had died. Stone absorbs heat at approximately 0.28 BTU per pound per degree Fahrenheit, Thornton explained to a small gathering of curious miners. This 2,200-pound mass can store over 12,000 BTUs when heated from 70 to 90 degrees, enough to warm a cabin through the night without additional fuel. His methodical explanation, delivered while tracing the invisible internal pathways with his finger, revealed an understanding of thermal dynamics that transcended typical frontier knowledge. The scientific principles behind Thornton's design became clearer through his reluctant explanations. Standard iron stoves produced immediate, intense heat that quickly dissipated when fire diminished, requiring constant maintenance for temperature regulation. By contrast, masonry heaters operated on an entirely different principle, storing heat during intense but brief burns, then radiating it gradually through substantial thermal mass. Where iron stoves might reach surface temperatures of 400 degrees Fahrenheit, creating uncomfortable hot zones while leaving distant corners frigid, Thornton's heater would maintain a consistent 150, 180 degree surface temperature that radiated evenly throughout the cabin. Lars Eriksson, whose Swedish heritage should have familiarized him with masonry heating traditions, maintained his professional skepticism. "I've built 25 cabins in these territories," he reminded the community during evening gatherings. Everyone heated adequately, with straightforward iron stoves, requiring 1/5 the construction effort and 1/10 the material weight. His arguments carried weight among men who valued simplicity and proven methods in a harsh environment where mistakes could prove fatal. October's first cold snap provided an initial testing opportunity. As temperatures dropped to 20 degrees Fahrenheit, Thornton demonstrated his firing technique, another departure from conventional practices. Rather than maintaining a constant small fire as others did, he created an intense blaze using split birch and spruce, maintaining temperatures above 1,400 degrees Fahrenheit for exactly 90 minutes before allowing flames to die completely. "The fire itself is merely the charging mechanism," he explained while monitoring the stone surface with his palm. "The heat storage is where efficiency occurs." Temperature readings taken 3 hours after fire extinction showed the heater's exterior maintaining 145 degrees Fahrenheit, while cabin ambient temperature held at 68 degrees. Remarkable performance that generated reluctant interest among the previously dismissive community. Magnus Olsson, after visiting Thornton's cabin during the first demonstration, found himself questioning conventional wisdom. "His place stays warmer than mine, despite having no visible fire," he admitted to McPherson. "Something about those stones holds the heat differently than iron." Thornton's knowledge sources became a topic of growing curiosity. His apprenticeship with Nikolai Saarinen, a third-generation Finnish stonemason who had immigrated to Massachusetts in 1862, had exposed him to Northern European heating principles, refined through centuries of winter survival. These designs, Thornton explained while sketching diagrams for increasingly interested neighbors, combined Russian, Finnish, and Swedish innovations adapted for North American materials. As October progressed, Thornton maintained meticulous temperature logs that revealed consistent performance despite increasingly cold conditions. His cabin maintained morning temperatures of 60-65 degrees Fahrenheit after single evening burns, while standard cabins dropped to 40-45 degrees overnight despite continuous fire maintenance. "It's the difference between banking coals and banking heat," Thornton observed, while comparing his minimal wood consumption with the steadily increasing fuel demands of conventional cabins. The measurable efficiency difference, Thornton's single daily firing consuming roughly 15 pounds of wood versus the 35 of 40 pounds required by standard stoves for equivalent heating, provided mathematical evidence that skepticism alone could not dismiss. November 1898 brought the first sustained cold to the Yukon Territory. As temperatures regularly dropped below zero, Thornton's masonry heater faced its first real test against conventional heating methods. The performance difference became increasingly apparent through daily observations and the detailed temperature logs Thornton maintained in a leather-bound journal. Standard cabins throughout the settlement struggled to maintain livable conditions. Magnus Olsson's dwelling, typical of frontier construction, required continuous fire management that consumed nearly a cord of wood every 2 weeks. Despite his diligent efforts, morning temperatures inside his cabin rarely exceeded 40 degrees Fahrenheit, with corners furthest from the iron stove dropping below freezing overnight. Water left in buckets developed ice crusts by morning, and frost formed on interior walls despite the constant fire. Thornton's cabin told a different story. His daily routine involved a single intense firing between 4 and 5:30 in the afternoon. This 90-minute burn consumed approximately 40 pounds of wood, similar to what others used in a single day, but provided heat that radiated throughout the night. Temperature readings taken at various points within his cabin showed remarkable consistency, with no more than a 6-degree difference between areas closest to and furthest from the heater. Most importantly, his cabin maintained 55 to 60 degrees Fahrenheit through the night without additional fuel or fire maintenance. He loads that thing once, gets it hot as blazes for an hour, then lets it die out completely, reported James McPherson after observing Thornton's evening routine. Yet his place stays warmer than mine, and I'm feeding my stove every 3 hours around the clock. The operational technique behind this efficiency became a topic of growing interest. Unlike conventional stove management that favored slow, steady burns, Thornton's approach maximized heat transfer to the stone mass through brief but intense fires. He selected wood specifically for this purpose. Well-seasoned birch and spruce split to precise dimensions that created optimal flame temperature and duration. The fire itself reached temperatures exceeding 1,500 degrees Fahrenheit at its peak, heating the internal baffles that transferred thermal energy to the surrounding soapstone mass. Lars Ericsson, whose professional skepticism had initially dismissed Thornton's approach, found himself asking increasingly detailed questions about the baffle system design. "How do you prevent smoke backup with so many turns?" he inquired during one evening visit. Thornton explained the careful calculation of cross-sectional areas that maintained proper draft despite the complex internal pathways, demonstrating principles of fluid dynamics that Ericsson had never considered in his decades of conventional chimney construction. The health benefits became another point of favorable comparison. Families maintaining overnight fires frequently reported respiratory irritation from smoke exposure and disturbed sleep from fire maintenance requirements. Thornton, sleeping undisturbed through the night in a smoke-free environment, showed none of these symptoms, remaining notably more rested and productive than his neighbors as winter deepened. Yet skeptics maintained their position with one consistent argument. "Wait until real winter hits," insisted Magnus Olsson. "November's just a taste of what's coming. We'll see how that fancy stone box does when it hits 60 below." The technical refinements continued through early December as Thornton adjusted firing times and wood selection based on decreasing outdoor temperatures. He discovered that extending the burn time to 110 minutes during particularly cold periods provided adequate heat storage for overnight warming without excessive fuel consumption. The mathematical efficiency of his system became undeniable as temperature differentials increased. Thornton's cabin consistently measured 20-25 degrees warmer than conventional dwellings by morning, while consuming 60% less firewood. As December progressed, temperatures dropped further, testing every heating system in the settlement beyond normal operating parameters. Frost formed on the inside of window glass throughout the community, and water froze solid in the buckets placed more than 6 feet from conventional stoves. Yet steam continued to rise from Thornton's chimney each morning, visible evidence of interior warmth that persisted long after his evening fire had died to cold ashes. January 12, 1899, brought a massive Arctic front that descended upon the Yukon with unprecedented fury. The mercury plummeted to 65 degrees below zero and remained there for 8 consecutive days. This extraordinary cold created a survival crisis that tested every heating system in Dawson City beyond its design limitations, separating theoretical adequacy from life or death performance. Magnus Olsson burned through his entire monthly wood allocation in just 6 days, desperately feeding his iron stove around the clock in a futile attempt to maintain survivable temperatures inside his cabin. The standard stove, which had served adequately during normal winter conditions, proved catastrophically inadequate against the sustained extreme cold. Despite continuous firing that consumed nearly 120 pounds of wood daily, interior temperatures in Olson's cabin fluctuated between 5 and 15 degrees above zero, cold enough to freeze solid food stored in cabinets and create ice crystals on blankets. Lars Eriksson, whose professional reputation rested on proven construction methods, found his expertly built cabin failing against the Arctic onslaught. The Swedish-born trapper maintained fires hot enough to damage his stove's interior plates, yet watched helplessly as water froze solid in buckets placed just 4 feet from the glowing iron. His family retreated to a single corner of their dwelling, abandoning the remainder of their living space to temperatures that dropped below zero, despite his desperate heating efforts. The crisis deepened throughout the settlement as conventional heating systems failed systematically. 3 trappers reported catastrophic stove failures when cast iron cracked under the stress of continuous maximum temperature fires. Their families sought emergency shelter with neighbors, creating dangerously overcrowded conditions in cabins already struggling to maintain adequate heat. Frostbite cases appeared among children and older residents, while hypothermia threatened even healthy adults forced to venture outside for wood gathering in the lethal cold. James McPherson faced the most serious leadership challenge of his tenure as settlement founder. Firewood supplies throughout the community reached critically low levels as desperate residents consumed 3 times their normal usage in failed attempts to maintain adequate temperatures. Several families burned furniture, packing crates, and even portions of interior structures when standard wood supplies proved insufficient. The settlement's doctor reported 7 cases of severe respiratory distress resulting from smoke inhalation as cabins filled with the byproducts of inefficient combustion from overworked stoves, burning green or inappropriate materials. Throughout this crisis, Thornton's cabin maintained interior temperatures between 50 and 55 degrees Fahrenheit, with no deviation from his standard firing schedule. The masonry heater, loaded once daily with 45 pounds of wood, produced a 100-minute intense fire that charged the 2,200-pound thermal mass with enough stored energy to radiate heat for 24 hours. No frozen water appeared inside his dwelling, and normal daily activities continued without the extreme measures consuming his neighbor's existence. The visual evidence became impossible to ignore by January 16th, while smoke poured continuously from chimneys throughout the settlement, indicating desperate attempts to maintain fires. Thornton's chimney produced only a brief period of intense output during his daily firing, followed by light steam that signaled internal warmth without active combustion. Through cabin windows, neighbors could observe Thornton moving comfortably in his shirt sleeves while they huddled in multiple layers of fur and wool. The breaking point came when Magnus Olsson's iron stove developed a catastrophic crack along its base plate, rendering it immediately unusable and forcing his family to seek emergency shelter. 2 other stove failures occurred the same day, creating a genuine survival crisis as temperatures remained locked below 60 below zero with no meteorological relief in sight. On January 18th, McPherson organized an emergency community gathering in Thornton's cabin, the only structure in the settlement, maintaining reliable, comfortable temperatures. 22 people crowded into the modest space, experiencing with undeniable clarity the performance difference between masonry heating and conventional methods. While wind howled outside and temperatures approached 70 below zero, Thornton's visitors removed outer layers of clothing in the even 55-degree warmth, observing with disbelief that no active fire burned in the heating chamber. "It's been 7 hours since his last fire," McPherson noted to the assembled group, "yet his floor still feels warm to the touch, and the air is better than the best our stoves can manage with continuous burning." The contrast moved beyond comfort differences to become a matter of survival versus suffering, transforming the community's understanding of what constituted practical frontier heating in the extreme Yukon environment. The emergency gathering in Thornton's cabin transformed from immediate survival necessity into an unprecedented opportunity for knowledge transfer. As families huddled in the consistent warmth, Thornton used the crisis as a teaching moment, explaining the complete scientific principles behind his masonry heater. The technical details, previously dismissed as impractical experimentation, now commanded the community's complete attention. "A masonry heater operates on fundamentally different principles than an iron stove," Thornton explained, sketching the internal baffle system on a sheet of paper for the gathered crowd. Rather than producing continuous heat that escapes through the chimney, this design captures 90% of the energy from rapid, intense burns and stores it in the thermal mass. He demonstrated how the complex internal channels forced hot gases to travel over 16 feet through stone passages before exiting, transferring maximum heat to the surrounding structure. The comparative data Thornton had methodically collected throughout winter provided mathematical evidence that even the most skeptical could not dismiss. His wood consumption averaged 43 pounds daily, compared to the settlement average of 110 pounds during normal winter conditions and nearly 200 pounds during the current crisis. Temperature logs showed his cabin maintaining 50-55 degrees Fahrenheit consistently, while conventional dwellings fluctuated between near freezing and brief periods of excessive heat following stoking. Lars Eriksson, whose professional reputation had been built on traditional heating methods, publicly acknowledged the superior performance of Thornton's system. "I've built fireplaces across 3 territories," he admitted to the gathered community, "but I've never seen anything maintain heat like this without active flames." The Swedish-born expert's validation carried particular weight, given his initial dismissal of Thornton's approach. His questions now focused not on whether the system worked, but on how quickly similar heaters could be constructed for other families. James McPherson calculated the economic impact of adopting masonry heating throughout the settlement. Each family currently consumed between 7 and 9 cords of firewood per winter, representing approximately 27 days of cutting, splitting, and hauling. Thornton's system required roughly 3.5 cords, a reduction that would free substantial time and energy for other essential tasks. In a region where every calorie of human effort carried survival implications, this efficiency translated directly to improved prospects for the entire community. As the Arctic front maintained its grip on the Yukon, Thornton began formal instruction on masonry heater principles. 2 miners with previous stoneworking experience volunteered to attempt retrofitting their cabins once temperatures moderated. Detailed plans were drawn, showing simplified versions that could be constructed with local materials in approximately 2 weeks. The knowledge transfer sessions covered stone selection, identifying soapstone and serpentine with optimal thermal properties, mortar composition using locally available clay mixed with specific proportions of sand and wood ash, and precise measurements for internal chambers that would create proper draft while maximizing heat absorption. Magnus Olsson organized a stone gathering initiative, identifying potential quarry sites that could be accessed despite winter conditions. The community's blacksmith began fabricating specialized tools that would be needed for the intricate internal construction. Families with adequate emergency heating began stockpiling appropriate materials in anticipation of building their own masonry heaters when temperatures permitted construction. The safety protocols for proper operation received particular attention, as Thornton demonstrated the specific firing technique that maximized efficiency while preventing dangerous overheating. Unlike iron stoves that could be loaded casually throughout the day, masonry heaters required precise management during their single daily firing, intense heat for a defined period rather than modest heat maintained continuously. This operational difference represented a fundamental shift in approach that required proper training to achieve optimal results and prevent damage to the system. By late January, as temperatures finally moderated to the more manageable range of 30 below zero, two families began preliminary construction of masonry heaters in their cabins. The projects, supervised by Thornton and assisted by Ericsson's newly converted expertise, represented the first expansion of thermal mass heating beyond its initial demonstration. The challenges of adapting existing structures proved significant but solvable, requiring partial dismantling of conventional chimneys and reinforcement of floor supports to accommodate the substantial weight of the new systems. As February's first thaw brought temperatures briefly above zero, 5 additional families began gathering materials for masonry heater construction. The settlement had experienced a fundamental shift in understanding what constituted practical frontier heating, moving from skepticism about Thornton's wasted interior space to recognition that thermal mass represented the difference between survival and suffering in extreme Yukon conditions. The spring of 1899 witnessed an unprecedented construction boom throughout the Dawson city settlement. As temperatures moderated, allowing for extended outdoor work, 14 new masonry heaters rose within cabins that had struggled through the winter with conventional heating. The transformation reflected a community-wide acknowledgement that traditional knowledge, properly adapted to local conditions, had proven superior to frontier convention in the face of extreme Yukon weather. Magnus Olson, once Thornton's most vocal skeptic, completed his masonry heater in early March, incorporating refinements suggested by the winter's harsh lessons. His modified design featured an expanded cooking surface integrated into the thermal mass, allowing food preparation using residual heat without additional fuel consumption. This innovation, shared with neighboring cabins, demonstrated how the core technology could be adapted for multiple functions beyond simple space heating. The technical expertise spread beyond the immediate settlement as traders and travelers witnessed the performance difference between traditional cabins and those equipped with masonry heaters. By late April, miners from outposts as far as 50 miles away traveled specifically to observe Thornton's original system and the variations that had emerged through community implementation. The regional adoption accelerated as word spread of cabins that maintained comfortable temperatures with a single daily firing even during the January deep freeze that had disabled conventional heating methods. Lars Eriksson, applying his professional masonry skills to the new technique, developed a standardized construction approach that reduced building time from Thornton's original 3 weeks to approximately 12 days. This efficiency, combined with precisely documented material requirements, made the technology accessible to families with limited construction experience. Eriksson's detailed manual, written in his native Swedish with English annotations, circulated throughout neighboring settlements as the primary reference for masonry heater construction across the territory. The economic impact became measurable as spring allowed for accurate assessment of winter fuel consumption. Cabins with masonry heaters had averaged 3.2 cords of wood through the entire winter, compared to 7.8 cords for conventional dwellings, a reduction exceeding 40% despite the extraordinary cold spell in January. This efficiency translated directly to human energy conservation in a region where woodcutting represented one of the most physically demanding survival requirements. Families with masonry heaters reported redirecting approximately 18 days of labor from fuel gathering to other productive activities. Health statistics compiled by the settlement's doctor revealed another significant advantage. Households with masonry heaters experienced 62% fewer respiratory complaints than those relying on conventional heating. The elimination of overnight smoke exposure, combined with consistent ambient temperatures and improved humidity levels maintained by the thermal mass, created measurably healthier living environments. These benefits proved particularly significant for children and elderly residents, who showed marked reduction in the winter coughs that had previously been considered inevitable in Yukon conditions. Government surveyors arriving in May to document settlement development noted the heating innovation in their official reports. The territorial assessment, intended to evaluate community viability and resource requirements, specifically mentioned the Thornton method as a significant adaptation that improved survival prospects throughout the region. This official recognition helped legitimize the technique among newcomers, who might otherwise have relied solely on conventional wisdom passed down through earlier frontier experiences. Thornton's status within the community underwent a complete reversal from the previous autumn. The man once mocked for wasting precious cabin space on an oversized chimney became the settlement's most sought-after advisor on matters extending beyond heating to general cabin design and resource efficiency. His approach to traditional knowledge synthesis, drawing from Finnish, Russian, and Scandinavian techniques rather than relying solely on North American frontier conventions, inspired broader reconsideration of established practices in areas ranging from food preservation to clothing design. The legacy of the masonry heater innovation received formal documentation in 1910, when architectural surveyors from the Canadian Department of Northern Development conducted a comprehensive assessment of Yukon housing adaptations. Their report identified 126 masonry heaters throughout the region, all traceable to Thornton's original demonstration during the winter of 1898-1899. The survey noted that dwellings employing thermal mass heating maintained structural integrity significantly longer than conventional cabins, as reduced humidity fluctuation and elimination of extreme temperature cycles preserved both wooden elements and mortar joints. Jebediah Thornton's quiet insistence on building a fool's stone chimney against all community advice had transformed heating practices throughout the Yukon Territory. His synthesis of traditional European knowledge, adapted to North American conditions and materials, created a legacy that extended far beyond his original cabin. The man once ridiculed for sacrificing living space to an oversized stone structure had demonstrated that properly applied thermal principles could mean the difference between mere survival and genuine comfort in one of North America's most challenging environments.